welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp for a pretty unique Apple TV Plus double feature. Not only is Jack going to break down Season 4 of Slow Horses, a show he's been keeping up with and quite enjoys, we're also going to discuss the Napoleon Director's Cut. After we both were pretty big fans of Napoleon last year, we were really excited to see this finally get onto Apple TV Plus, and while neither of these conversations quite is enough for a full episode of the podcast, we figured why not put them together in a special little bonus episode this week. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoy. Now let's get to Jack's review of Slow Horses Season 4.
Hi everyone, Jack here, Editor-in-Chief at Clapper. Carson's just very kindly allowed me 10-15 minutes, probably less than that really, to very briefly talk to you all about the latest season of Slow Horses from Apple TV. So I'm going to be very brief, very slim on plot details, because I know for fans out there who have sort of binged 1, 2 or 3, or just sort of coming into 1, 2 and 3 now, the less you know about Season 4 in terms of detail, probably for the better. So as usual, we find Jackson Lamb's rejects of MI5, MI6. People have been put through the ringer, thrown out of normal day-to-day discussions, so on and so forth, due to issues in their past or issues of what they've done on the job. And we find River Cartwright at a time, played by Jack Lowden. From the end of Season 3, there's been small snippets of character detail where very much the calm before the storm with his character arc here, with his grandfather, which is probably as brief as I'll probably be able to say. This feels like a continuation of the first 2 seasons in a sense of you have an overarching narrative that seemingly River Cartwright and his grandfather are inadvertently and advertently in the middle of, with a great deal of set-piece character, entertainment, comedy, all well-rounded surrounding it. I do apologise if this is, of course, vague, but as I've mentioned, for 6 episodes, for essentially, 6 half-an-hour episodes, the most limited amount of information you should get out of this, from me, will probably be prosperous in the long run due to the twists and turns of how emotional this season is. There's quite a lot of answers here, throughout the first 3 seasons that were sort of alluded to or were put on the back burner of letting the audience decide about certain elements. Season 4 pretty much puts answers to names, answers to faces, and answers to a lot of history surrounding regret and about the future and about where you are and how you can change that, and how were supposed to be raised, let's say, or there's the old issue of being a fuck up in this show. These characters are here; they're all well regarded in their own right, but they've done fuck ups in the professional lives that has made them to go to Slough House to be a slow horse. It's interesting with the parallel here is that there's the questioning quite thematically, which is quite enriching in the whole season, about that, if you ultimate nurture versus nature, which is so interesting considering that there's the balance of comedy and drama throughout these 4 seasons are almost perfection. This is just like the first 3 seasons. The balance between sense of humour, comedy and drama is pitch perfect. And you've got the likes of Gary Oldman to deal with that, and you've got the likes of the fabulous Jack Lowden, or Loudon, which, however you do say it, apologies to anyone with that last name, mispronouncing it. But you need a fabulous type of performer here. But nevertheless, it very much puts on very good writing, but very quick writing here. This is 6 episodes that go extremely quickly to get to the point. We travel out of London for the first time, as what feels like we go to France, and there's a whole story arc there. There's a mythology that's being created here. But also, regardless of this going to new extents in setting and character, I also found it to be really rewarding with the people who we've got here. Obviously, from last season, the character of Sasha Reeves plays. That's an interesting arc because it's sort of very much slowed down, let's say. And granted, this character's had quite a lot to do in big moments in minute screen time. The only aspect of this performance in season 4 is that it feels sort of reduced and restricted because of where we leave off in season 3, which is a shame because Sasha Reeves is excellent here. This stoic woman who is like constantly bombarded or ridiculed, and yet is often the hero of the day. Again, about that comedy and drama, dramedy, perfectly pitch perfect here. But the one person I wanted to mention, bar Jack Loudon, or Jack Loudon again, apologies, who again is like terrific through these 4 seasons, and hopefully the Broccoli family or MGM or Amazon or at least Eon. Or Danjag are looking at him for Bond, because out of anything here, he's perfect as River Cartwright. I mean, there's so much here within that performance. Like there's so much sort of heartache, boisterous, and then there's also that factor of he is essentially a fuck up, and how they sort of evolve that and grow with that. It's sort of really comforting to watch. There's always that thing in the back of their mind watching that performance of how egotistical River Cartwright can often be. That element of there's going to be something at the pipeline to rock him. It's always really fun. And here it's played in a very emotional consciousness. It's very, very dark. It's very, very heartbreaking to watch on occasion. Probably the most emotional season yet, bar elements of season 1, but particularly of season 2 with certain characters' demises, regarding the effects of that onto everyone else. The one performer I did want to mention though, before I got sidetracked with River Cartwright, is we've got to talk about Rosalind Elazar, who has been on the back burner these last few seasons, especially regarding sort of her central relationship of season 2 with another character that came to a quite emotional climax. Season 3, there was sort of these pinpoints of okay, and then there's certain elements of emotive core there that sort of got left to focus on a rather large set piece with all the last 3 episodes. Here, I think she's the star of the show here. Her charisma, her chemistry with River Cartwright, Jack Loudon's character, is fabulous. There's going to be sort of an is there, isn't there moment with them too. I hope they sort of come to sort of some conclusion, but the chemistry they have there about sort of evolving together, evolving from the idea of like being fuck-ups and actually getting somewhere with this, having character growth, really felt quite compelling. She's excellent here. Really, really, really good. She was very good in the latter half of season 2. I think that she's good on par in season 3, but it felt more sort of a different type of show. The season 3 regarding where the characters were. That's why in question Sasha Reeves feels slightly underused here. But granted, tomato. I think 4 seasons in, there's got to be sort of a different structure here. But she was really incredible here. I'm not going to say a lot about this because I think it's best to watch it, but Hugo Weaving plays essentially what the villain is this season. Terrific. Very much an external monologue, dialogue-driven performance, which is surprising considering obviously him being Agent Smith. And yes, for any Matrix fan out there are Agent Smith isms here in this performance. That monotone, deep, progressive voice comes out on occasion to just elevate the room. He's terrific. There's multiple occasions where he's just sat talking to certain characters, and it's terrifying. The screen presence Weaving has, it's never been faltered whatsoever, and he is terrific. There's a lot of questions regarding that, and then the series, to its credit, doesn't actually answer a whole great deal of it, leaving the door open potentially for the fallout of what this season happens. And unfortunately, with season 3 and 4 being commissioned at the same time, and season 5 being commissioned solo. I'm just hoping there's going to be more and more and more yet to come. But narratively, it's incredibly immersive. As usual, it's really fun. Gary Oldman is playing Jackson Lamb to perfection, almost like strange as a role he was born to play. It feels so effortless to watch, yet so commandeering to watch. It feels like the twists and turns regarding that character feel like they're ready to pounce. But how he deals with certain things, how he's a little bit more emotionally invested here with certain characters, perhaps he's worried about certain information being released and then having to take that on board, and the emotional angst he has with certain other characters, which is very interesting. It feels like a really good evolution to watch these characters progress and grow. It feels like a really good natural step. But I think anyone who has watched season 1 to 3 is going to love this. Anyone who is sort of just touching the water, obviously don't go into this blind. It really does have to be stated to watch the first 3 seasons, but you'll binge them regardless. It's a really good show to watch. It does feel very bingeable. Obviously, this is going to be released weekly every Wednesday in the UK. I believe that is possible in the US as well. But obviously, just check your Apple TV Plus channel programming to just make sure about that. Having the pleasure of like binging season 1 and 3, it does feel really difficult to wait that week with this, but it will feel, I promise anyone out there, it will feel greatly worth the anticipation and the tension. Another stellar season from these writers and from these creatives of a project that just seemed to just fall out of nowhere and has gained great traction commercially and critically from audiences and critics alike. In its rating and its viewership. So I do hope everyone goes out there and rocks it and goes to watch Apple TV Plus and goes to watch Slow Horses. And obviously for someone who has Apple TV Plus, have Amazon Prime, having Netflix, there's a lot of program out there. There's a lot of programming. There's a lot to watch. But I must admit, Slow Horses out of everything is something I always want to go back to, regardless if I've just seen it, regardless if I'm on season 1, episode 6, season 3, episode 4. There's something always to go back to. It's such an enriching type of show. And at the end of the day, at 6 episodes, you're not there for 13 hours. Everything feels very concise for an audience. It doesn't patronise your time. It doesn't feel condescending. It gets through A, B, and C, and it gives a great deal of emphasis and depth while it's doing it. So I would have to say, I think Slow Horses season 4 is probably the second best season yet. The first season being terrific. That being said, the more I think about it, the more I'm able to go back and rewatch all this together. It feels like a really integral piece of the larger puzzle here, and I can only hope that we go and get some more. So anyone out there, go watch it, binge it. You with any Apple device, you do get months free to watch. Go watch it. The program on there, Time Bandits, which me and Carson have also reviewed. I'm just here on my troublesome lonesome here. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's not taking too much of your time, but having watched like a lot of stuff this year, having watched a lot of stuff last year, the programming Carson terrifically puts together. It felt difficult to put this in and make Carson watch 6 half-an-hour episodes, and me being a fan of the show and also having watched Time Bandits with Carson, it felt a really good time to review this and also get it out there. And hopefully we'll get season 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. How many are yet to come? It'll be an absolute pleasure from this to come out of nowhere to be so successful and so engaging and enriching. It's definitely the one to watch the last few years. So yeah, please go out and watch it, listen to it. And then thank you very much for just taking 15 minutes out of the programming, Carson, to put me in, and I'll let Carson take it away with whatever's next. But thank you very much. Have a great day, and thank you for listening.
And before we go any further, I just want to remind you that if you want even more ClapperCast, you can go ahead and get it on our Patreon. For literally only a couple bucks a month, you gain access to a monthly bonus episode, which includes some really fun conversations we've had. We've dived into the works of John Waters, of Terrence Malick. We've talked about films like Lady Bird. We had a John Couture double feature if you really liked what me and Nick were doing with that. This month, we're going to be jumping into The Shape of Water to start a brand new series series that I'm going to mention at the end of this episode. So again, if you want that, again, just a couple bucks a month, not only are you supporting our show and supporting independent film criticism, but you are also gaining access to an entire catalog of bonus content. That is at patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. Now let's get to our review of Napoleon, the Director's Cut. Okay, Jack, and as we move the conversation to Napoleon, the Director's Cut, I will go ahead and start us off, considering you just gave us that brilliant review for Slow Horses. This is going to be a weird conversation, I think, for people at home and maybe us on the call, because we come at this from liking the Napoleon film. We have a full episode if you want to go see it, but I know a lot of people were disappointed by that film. A lot of people came into the Director's Cut with a mindset of, will this fix what was originally there? I don't think either of us were at that point. We both were quite appreciative of what Ridley Scott did there. So we were coming at this with a different perspective. And also, I've not seen Napoleon since last October, sitting in the coldest theater I've ever been in for 3 hours watching that film. So this is also my experience just watching the entire film on a second viewing. So it's hard to parse in a way, what is the emotions of the Director's Cut? What is the emotions of just watching this film in general for a second time? I will say, and this is a significant portion of added content, like over 40 minutes, unlike our Avatar films where we were watching it for 3 minutes extra here and there. I really love this, but I also really came away from this watch understanding that I really love Napoleon. I think for anyone at home who's like, should I watch this? Should I not? First off, just watch the original cut. This cut does not add anything overly new. It doesn't revolutionize this film, doesn't revolutionize the message. You're either going to vibe with Napoleon or you're not going to vibe. I find this to be such a compelling, rich political narrative that it harkens to current politics very well. Look at the fragility of ego and specifically the real world consequences with it. Again, we have a full episode breaking all that down. This just adds to it. This is just more of the same thing. So I feel like if you really hated Napoleon, if you sat there and you were like, this is dumb, I'm not vibing with kind of the campiness of this, I'm not vibing with the performances, I don't care about this message. Yes, this goes deeper in some ways. I don't think this is going to do it for you to where you're like, oh, this is a completely different film. This is not like Kingdom of Heaven Director's Cut. But I will say, if you really enjoyed or even somewhat enjoyed and vibed with what Napoleon offered last year with the theatrical cut, I really enjoyed having more of this. I really thought it richened the world, richened his relationships. I thought it helped the pacing. I remember one of my initial issues was how it jumps between times very rapidly. And I felt like sometimes, which is ironic for such a long film, I felt like sometimes the pacing was a little bit rushed here and there because you're just trying to get a lot on screen. I thought this worked really well. So for someone who's drinking the Kool-Aid, I think the Director's Cut is brilliant, but if you're not going to like Napoleon anyway, I just don't see why you would jump in with this one or try to revisit this world. Jack, I'm curious your thoughts, though. What were your thoughts on Napoleon, the Director's Cut?
I think you just took every single word out of my mouth that I was going to say. I think we were two people in the minority when Napoleon came out. We both saw it in theatres as well, which I think added to that that visual medium of watching it on the big screen. I think we, again, like you said, you go watch the Napoleon episode we did. We were both quite looking forward to it, and we're both quite big Ridley Scott fans as well, and probably the last big director of this caliber working today on a big front, just seemingly unstoppable. And I think we were probably the only two people who read that in the way that the film was approached by ego, fragility. We're watching someone who is a childish, petulant, egotistical, well, like I said, like basically a child. And I think a lot of people looked at it and sort of was expecting. I don't know if this is due to like the commercial side of it, like the advertisements. We were going to watch this gladiator-esque epic. I don't really think that was the approach from it, even from the thesis. So I think a lot of people went into Napoleon expecting something very different, and to allude exactly what you said, it's surprising that this is only 48 minutes. And just very quickly here, it's interesting since the release of this is that there's actually been quite a lot of conversation about the production of this film rather than the actual statement about the film itself. There's a lot that's coming out with Joaquin Phoenix now, especially with the Todd Haynes thing, which we're probably not going to go into, but he was wanted to pull out of this 2 days, I think it was 2 weeks before, 10 days before, asked for Paul Thomas Anderson to come in, and and rewrite the screenplay, which has not been confirmed nor denied by anyone, which would presume to be probably a little bit of traction of truth there, and probably was paid like six figures for it as well. And then there's a lot of debacle about this. I mean, for anyone out there, we were like back and forth on Twitter, X, joking like the Napoleon cut, like we're waiting for the Napoleon cut, the director's cut, and for a while we were like both sort of relegated to the next. Like, I don't think this is going to happen. And then one day it went through the MPAA, didn't it? There's the rating board, and then like 5, 6, 7 days ago, it just dropped, which slightly worried me about. Directors cut of Ridley Scott's caliber, they usually change the film completely, or they're just this embedded weaving of like showcasing this massive, larger epic that he's had to put down to get into audiences. The fact that this just came out slightly worried me, and to go back to my original point, this was what 4 hours and 10 minutes originally, the director's cut, and it's only 40. Is it 48 minutes added? So let's say let's just round it back and say it's an hour of more footage. Surprisingly, and I'm fully on board with you. It actually doesn't change the shape of this. It doesn't change anything that you're looking at. It builds upon the nature of the beast about Phoenix, about his family dynamic, and especially with Josephine, to get sort of a prologue with her. That being said, I generally couldn't really sort of see where the 40 minutes came from. There's a little bit more in Russia. There's another small little battle, and there's those little small little dynamics. 3 minutes here, 3 minutes there. That probably would in addition would add up to this 40, 50 minutes. Sorry. That being said, I didn't really think it was like, it's not the Kingdom of Heaven version. It's not the Roadshow. It's not 4 hour cut. It's not the Counselor, which you watch the theatrical cut and then you watch the director's cut, and they're two very different films. Blade Runner especially. This one didn't really probably achieve needing the director's cut. I felt that everything that was added to this film, the small details, were sort of secondary, third editions to then reiterate this petulance. But I think we got it the first viewing, me and you personally. So perhaps it's trying to cover up the fact of like, oh, well, if you didn't get the thesis, this is it more. But I would have just released that theatrically anyway. So I'm sort of in two minds of it. That being said, it was strange to watch the theatrical in a cinema and watch the director's cut at home and see the equivalent difference. And I did really enjoy it. It was I had the Govey lights on in the background. So when it was in Waterloo at the end, the blues, the greens were popping. I watched it pitch black. It does look really impressive. I think seeing his fallout in Russia adds a little bit more weight to his final little aspect. But the one thing that sort of surprised me, and again, it's probably a throw it back to you, I was surprised how little of Josephine was in here, because we added, I think I mentioned about the swans like going away, and then like, there's more conversations about their letters and stuff. But it felt like if you were going to go into the Josephine arc, why not call this Napoleon and Josephine? And for me personally, having watched both cuts, it'd be interesting to get your opinion after this, is that I think that they went in with this trying to make the archetype biopic from a writer's point of view and look at Napoleon and realise that the complexity and the texture and the richness comes from him having an attitude and him having an absorbent amount of ego. But what are the elements surrounding that either feed it or disrupt it? And Josephine is both. I think during production, there's quite a clear direction that Josephine's integral to this. And I think on both occasions, she's probably not in it enough. And I think Vanessa Kirby is an actress I've really warmed up to lately. I've not quite enjoyed the Mission Impossible statements, because I think that she can get lost in that, as does, when you've got Hayley Atwell in there and stuff like that now. But I really enjoyed her in this. I just wish she was in it more. But I still think it's a very venomous piece about patriarchy, revolution, strangely about the populace of having an opinion, and it being swayed, about the political endeavour. And again, your allusion to modern times now is frightening to behold. But I'll let you take over that. But it was fun. It was interesting. But it wasn't as a dynamic exploit that I was probably hoping or wanting to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is about Napoleon because I mean, as you mentioned, we were definitely a minority, and I don't say that to be like, oh,
Hmm.
we got it and we're so smart compared to everyone else, but like, I just don't get how you watch this film and don't get the like very clear, dare I say, sometimes nearly like almost explicit political ties to today and to the dangers of this and the themes we're talking about, the populace going into politics. How do you have that cult of personality? How do you form it? And then the ending is all about like the actual deaths, like all about the real consequences. It's all there. I don't know. Again, you can go listen to our entire Napoleon review. I don't need to relitigate that entire conversation. But I think this is. I thought it played well at home. I definitely enjoyed watching it in the theater, but I do think like it plays well enough at home. I don't even the action scenes I think look quite good as far as how I watched them. I enjoyed it. I think again, if you really enjoy Napoleon, and some of this is definitely like my praise comes from just watching Napoleon again after our conversation and just enjoying the film. But like,
Hmm.
I definitely think you can watch the director's cut, have a great time. Not necessarily overly necessary. I do wish there was even more Josephine because, as you mentioned, that is a very rich vein here. But I think this all connects for me and creates a really meaningful final product that I'm sad like no one else likes or appreciates. I
Yeah.
also think it's wildly funny. And maybe that's part of it is that it consistently comes back to the humor, but I think that all feels very natural to me. I know, like, friend of the podcast, Maxence Vincent, said this was his favorite, the funniest film he saw of the year. And I think a lot of people tend to laugh at this and think that is, it's almost similar in a way to our conversation we had on Trap and Shyamalan, where like
Hmm.
someone will do something comedic in a drama or serious setting, and they're like, the audience will be like, oh, that's a failure of what you're trying to do. You're trying to be serious, but actually you're funny, so that's bad. The jokes here, the absurdist lines that come out of Napoleon's mouth, like there's a purpose to that. There's a reason it sounds silly. It's supposed to be silly, as you
Hmm.
mentioned, it's supposed to be childish. Just because you're laughing at it and it's funny doesn't mean that the rest of the consequences and the rest of the darkness isn't still dark. And
Yes.
I don't know. Like, I just wish, because I think this is genuinely like I raised it to a 4.5, verging on nearly 5 stars. I just wish like people because I think there's such richness to have in the conversation of this film, and I just no one else has it. So I don't know. I don't want to say like frustrated, but it's just like I feel like there's something here and everyone's ignoring it. But okay, whatever. Like, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
yeah. I mean, I can remember. Obviously the podcast was a few months ago, but I remember vaguely that I can remember the scene where I was like, oh my god, I know what they're doing here. And it's when he's at the beginning when he gets to the port and he goes and looks at everything, and you think, oh, this is a really smart, intelligent man. And he's watching France burn down in front of his eyes, but it's just not being set on fire. And he goes to that port knowing full well that he has a destiny, and that's the which vision is going to get there. That's the sort of clinical type of Napoleon I was sort of presented towards. I was like, oh, okay, this will be interesting. Like, we're going to watch a man rise up in the ashes. We've seen it, but it'd be interesting to do. It will feel it's eerily similar to the likes of Ridley Scott stuff before, or usually within the genre. And then there's a sequence where his horse gets blown to bits, and he's like running into it, and he has no reason or jurisdiction to pull that sword out and go fight, but he has this adamant feeling of he needs to have blood on that sword. He has to have blood on his face in order to be registered as if he's done something. And I think it's interesting how he pulls out the again like the the big ball from the cannonball, and he presents it as, I'll give that to mother, as if like it's some sort of self congratulatory type of endeavor, when really he put himself into his own hands. Like, he could have died easily. He was very close of dying anyway, and it gets repeated throughout with the Russian thing as well, like going to the maximum to prove yourself, but then by proving others. I think it's a really complex and interesting avenue to go around by a character who's very multifaceted. And I think, to your point as well about the genre, like, I think it's very difficult for an audience to accept someone who is military strategic and has gone from one point to being a general to be the emperor of France, and then he would make like whimpering noises to his wife for sex, as if he's like some sort of like again a petulant child. But I think that's the richness of a character who's complex, and I think people don't see that as complex because it's just childish and it's very stoic. So how can you have something in the middle? But the guy was like, I mean, like he's built upon ego. Like look at modern politicians and look at certain things going on. Like you have them committing crimes in the public image, and again, this goes back to the 70s with Nixon. Probably goes back even further with genocidal intent in the 20s, and it goes even further back with the native representation in America, even in my country with colonialism and all sorts of stuff. The sense of ego being so brash is an identifiable thing about power and how it corrupts. So that to me was like very basic, very interesting. Like you said, it was surprising how people didn't get that, or at least the correlation of someone being like trying to evoke a sense of utter masculinity and being childish as well. There's an interesting. That's very much like toxicity of being a man as well. I think it's so interesting. But I tell you one thing, Carson, that after watching the director's cut, where I was like, to your point here, and I feel like the last few features of Ridley Scott, we've spoke about this in context as well, but with his passing of his brother in 2012, Ridley's films thematically have been very challenging upon himself as a director, looking at themes like Alien Covenant, Prometheus as well, looking to find the creator, asking questions, why? And then you go into stuff like The Counselor, which very just nihilism. Then you go into stuff like The Martian about trying to be saved, and there's a lot of brutality there, and there's a lot of internal suffering that's projected onto the eternal landscape of cinema. And I don't think anyone has picked that up for a long time. And I think when you get to the likes of Alien Covenant, it's like, oh my God, like, he's not bothered about meeting his maker. He's lost two brothers and most of his family to cancer. I don't think this is a man whose destiny is wanting to ask questions of or like give me more life. It's like why would you take these people away from who've done nothing wrong? And I think it's an interesting thing with Ridley Scott. And when you get to like The Last Duel, which we did on the podcast, I believe we did with Alina and Paul Price as well. And we had like I watched it at Venice. I think it came back and we had another discussion about it. And there was a really interesting aspect to that film, not only because of the subject of sexual assault within a Ridley Scott film, because of his presentation of the female form with Alien, Thelma and Louise, etc., 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 go on and so forth, but how that film is presented as a two waging wars of masculinity of man, projecting their innocence through venom and nastiness and anger, and then getting the truth, and there's no qualms and no questions about who the truth is in that film, presented it as the victim's voice, which I think for a filmmaker in his 80s to do that and present it without any qualms of like, I don't give a fuck about what anyone else says, that's the truth, I think is quite a brave thing, especially within this weird cinema aspect we're in now, where people get a little bit strange, where people present the female form or gender or sexuality, people like just reject the notion of that those identities or those things. But beside, back to my point, I have to say though, with the Last Duel, I felt it was eerily similar to this in the context of, if you don't have that duel at the end, I think people present the same thing as Napoleon of, well, this is just a character piece. Where's the big payoff? Where's the big payoff? And I think that's what works for The Last Duel, is you get the self-destruction between two men, and the victim has to go through that ordeal of the court order. And it's very much like Josephine here. Josephine is victimized because of the actions of her husband. Her daughter and her son are like victimized as well. She works her way back through because she's a survivor, which in the theatrical cut looks a little bit more devious. Than it gives a bit more palate here, and the fact that she very much is she has to do some horrible things to stay alive, which I think we should have had at least 25 more minutes of in that jail cell, to just really see, not to be like nihilistic or sadistic, but I think that is hairs on someone's back there. That is the texture on someone's skin. That is the wounds and all sorts that speak 1,000 volumes. But I think that very much like I said, like the last duel, without that penultimate fight sequence, this doesn't really have that. It's very much a character study, and I think people are not really bothered about wanting to see a 3-hour character study about a man who lived, 300, 200 years ago. The irony of that is that, like you said again, you look at that as an echo today, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed between that echo, and you go all the way back to Exodus: Gods of Kings that he did in 2014. Again, about two brothers divided about where they want to go, about loyalty. I think there's such a richness with this stuff. I think it's an issue of modern audiences more so than not. And I'm not trying to say that Ridley Scott's some sort of god on form. I think he makes cinematic mistakes. Well, I'm sure that Gladiator 2 will be an interesting watch, but there's a texture here that a director has gone through a certain type of life, a brutality, and not necessarily now afraid to present um, nastiness in a sense of like that's our reality, but give a bit of hope. I think there's a beautiful notion at the end of Last Duel where she never remarried and she lives alone with a child. I think there's a beauty there that at least through hardship and horror, someone is allowed to live. Josephine wasn't afforded for that, and you could probably argue that it might have been more beneficial for her to leave the earth while Napoleon was still very much through his actions. But that might be me elevating the material. I hope people are not thinking I'm condescending or patronising. Just the way I read the film, I think that Scott's a very, very talented, ambidextrous type of filmmaker. And the amount of people I've seen that say he hasn't made a good film in 15 years, I generally think are absolutely like Neanderthals. To make
You
that,
mean a guy
well,
who goes into production a few weeks after learning his brother dies about a film about two brothers and their relationship as it's tested and pulled? Like, you think there's no thematic richness there or any
yeah,
connections or ties or emotions? Like, that's what people say.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I mean,
go off.
look at Alien Covenant, which obviously going through the Romulus season, doing Alien August. I mean, James Franco's character in that is like a fucking rock climber who dies through an action that's not any of his fault. Through just again, you could just say like just a random occurrence would be like burnt alive. Obviously, it's a different tragedy in itself, um, but like having to put that texture, that's not a coincidence. It's a conscious aspect of then him living through the idea of Catherine Waterson's character, then going through life without that mate, without that life buddy, without having his brother on screen. And I think when you get to Napoleon, I think it's so interesting when you look at that texture about that man had it all and it wasn't enough. And I think to look at that through the prism of loss, of Mother Nature and also of tragedy, I think really much does elevate the material. But granted, I think with Scott with Napoleon, I do think there's an aspect of he's doomed if he does and doomed if he doesn't. This does not play very well as a 3-hour film anywhere because of the idea of what modern audiences is. That being said, I still can't quite fathom why you wouldn't just release the director's cut through Apple TV and then have the theatrical cut play as the theatrical cut in cinema. That to me is like a very strange type of idea. Um,
It's also weird because there is a longer director's cut out there. Because originally he was reporting that he had one that was over four
yeah,
hours long, then trimmed it down, I guess, for this director's cut. But I will say I appreciate that there is a director's cut, especially on streaming. I feel like outside of Zack Snyder, which I feel like that's just an entirely almost different conversation anyway, you really don't see this a lot anymore with films. Like, I appreciate that in general, but I definitely agree with you. But it's also weird that like this isn't the full director's cut. There's another cut out there that maybe we'll get to in a few years, but definitely odd.
yeah, it does remind me of Exodus: Gods and Kings, where like he said, oh, there's a 4-hour cut there, but because of the political hemisphere, cultural hemisphere at the time, and obviously you could not do that now with obvious things. And then the conversation was arising with, well, you're putting American stars, and his argument was, but I couldn't get this film made. Now I think there's probably 10 years later, there's a conversation of, well, um, our I got a little bit of Irish came out then. Our that's my heritage for you. But then the debate is, well, could he do it now? And I know this is off topic slightly, but with the modern audience now not going out to the theatre as much and sort of rejecting pieces of the biblical nature, at least conversations about like mother, like we did with Mother, having a conversation about like you need to sort of look in the mirror after this and be like, we are part of the problem, or this film presents as such, and it's sort of damning the populace. Are you able to accept that subconsciously or consciously? And I think a lot of audiences just reject it outright. But I've said that multiple times. But I think it probably proved him right to do what he did at the time, because now it's like, well, it just wouldn't get made. And I think Napoleon's an interesting one because not to end on such a bitter note that we seem to do every week now. And I'm interested to hear more of your thoughts about Kirby as well. But it just feels very bitter to me is that I don't think we'll probably see this in the next 10 years with reason to Scott's uh, output, but also because I just think this film presents quite a very interesting aspect about men, and I think and an aspect of it's not very much consciously about this man is toxic, present to such an audience. There's very much about the political nature, the rise, France at the time, and the dynamic between essentially two very scorned lovers. But I also think that very much at the back burner here is a questioning of when is enough, when is enough, when is enough enough, and also how far are you willing to go to burn everything down to prove a very strange, redundant point when everything is at home, you know? And I think it goes back to that interview what he did with about his career about in Iceland, mid shooting Prometheus, gets a call from his brother. His brother said, "Oh, there's a conversation." He said, Ridley was like, "Look, get yourself back into a film. Get yourself back into a film." Said his goodbyes, put the phone down, and Tony, was never there the next day. I think that it always is reiterated throughout, and I think here it very much feels like a flavour of, maybe going out there and conquering what necessarily doesn't need to be conquered, but it can be conquered. Again, back to Prometheus. Why? Let's do this. Why are we doing this? Why all these questions? Why do we need the answers? When really, at the central core, that's where it probably matters. So really, that's probably where I come down on it. I think it's a very rich piece on a personal note that's very extravagant. I still think the Waterloo battle's excellent. I still think the score is good. I think the performances all around are excellent. I think people with the issue of Phoenix now are going to sort of damn this a little bit. I think he's very, very good here. A very subverted, expected performance. I feel that's very uncanny for what the archetype is. I think it plays wonderfully in the context of the character, but also within the medium of these type of stories. I think Kirby, like I said again, very good. But I think predominantly here, it's more so sort of the supporting actors. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was also in Saltburn and Never Spoke. I think he's a British or Welsh actor. I can never remember his name. He's not been on TV for like 10 years. I could listen to that guy talk for hours. It's so deliciously eloquent how he gives out stuff, and the roles he played in both Saltburn and here, he has such an external visual look and also has that audible look as audible voice. And I sort of love the passion that everyone's in here. I love the costume design. I get again big fan of Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, which you should watch before that, about such an interesting subverted take about just being a child and the fact how she does that through the prism of being like a chic young girl, and that dissonance between political French high standard life and just wanting to be a girl and live a life as a young girl. And then watching this, I think they work two really good double bills. Really interesting filmmakers who seemingly can't get stuff made anymore as well. So I'll pass it back to you. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Just to say very briefly though, I would find this difficult to rank as you did it. It definitely gets pushed up, but not by a significant amount I probably would have hoped for.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of close it off, I think it says something that for 30 minutes now, we've went deep into this film and like we're only scratching the surface of what we could talk about thematically here. I just keep coming away with like every time I think about this film, and certainly now every time I watch this film, there's more and more that stands out to me. I think this is a really great feature, along with a lot of Scott, and maybe we're just drinking the Kool-Aid. Maybe we
Probably.
are the people watching Napoleon come back to the beach and ride, and we're riding there with him. Like, yeah, our empire's back. Like, maybe that's us. But I think this is really fantastic, and I'm happy that we got a chance to talk about it once again. And hopefully, someone out there is listening to this and decides I'm going to give it a chance, because I think, as with all of Ridley Scott's recent works, pretty masterful stuff. I think we've been drinking the Kool-Aid quite a bit here. You know, we one day we'll talk about House of Gucci again, I'm sure. Gladiator 2 comes out in a couple months. We'll be talking about that. But quite a fun film. And I do appreciate, again, that we have a streaming service that's putting out a director's cut. We have a director who's putting out a director's cut who's making big, epic sized dramas like this. As we see with Kevin Costner, that is not an easy thing to do right now. For
Hmm.
some reason, we have this mass, and we don't need to get fully into it, but we have this mass rejection on social media where we like attack people who do this, and we're like, what a loser for thinking he can make a big budget like Western, where it's like, I don't get why we're laughing at that. It's like actually haunting that films like that and films like
Yeah.
Napoleon are not catching more attention and not getting more praise, because these films are going to be dead in 10 years. And that really saddens me, as we have less and less people like Ridley Scott and Kevin Costner who are willing to make them and are willing to put risks on making them. And we have less people in the audience who are willing to go see them, and even less who are willing to appreciate them and engage with them. I think it's a very odd thing that we just celebrate. And like, even when Kevin Costner is out in Venice, like desperately trying to get attention for Horizon Part 2, we have people laughing at him at the press conference as he's like in tears, being like, I'm making these films and I'm still gonna make them. And they're like, what a loser. It's like, I don't get it. That's good. That's what I want from filmmakers, to have passion and have effort and to put in these epic original projects. I like that because I like film, and it's weird to laugh at that and memeify it. Same with Ridley Scott and Napoleon. I feel like with this, or with even like Last Duel and stuff, people are like, oh, like this is just so like this is so stupid. Wow, Ridley Scott like missed, no Oscar prospects, enter next. It's like, I don't get how you're engaging with cinema in that way, but alas, not to rant on everyone, I think we can wrap it up here. Napoleon, the director's cut, and Slow Horses season 4, both streaming on Apple TV Plus. Jack, this is a little bit of a bonus episode. We don't need to get into rapid reviews, but I did want to ask a question of the week, because we kind of mentioned Vanessa Kirby in this film, really good. I want to ask the question of the week, just being, what's your favorite Vanessa Kirby performance? Because it's actually, we've covered a lot of her work on ClapperCast. And I'm curious, Jack, first for you, just what is your favorite Vanessa Kirby film, or
This gonna,
performance rather?
yeah, this is gonna sound such a cop out, but she's been in a lot of stuff that I've seen, like Everest and Jupiter Ascending, like Wachowski core fan there. But she's all like not really. I think we're actually probably in the midst of her like going to that next level. So it's hard to sort of to choose something. I'm not going to choose a Mission Impossible film. I have to be honest. I've seen her in Mr. Jones, which I thought she was quite good in, but I also thought that James Norton was quite good in that. It's another underseen one. So that would be my like, go watch. That's an interesting one about, eerily similar to the idea of Napoleon, where it's about the Soviet Union. A Welsh photographer, a British photographer goes over and documents the famine there, and then the political fallout of that, spreading it to the world, and the dangers of what happens. Based on a true story, very underseen, but Mr. Jones. But really, I have to say, from what I've seen of her output, I haven't seen Italian Studies, which I've heard is very good. I know you've got one that's going to come that's pretty brutal, but I have to say, I think she's very, very good in Napoleon. I think she holds her own. I think she's naturally extremely pretty, and she's absolutely gorgeous. And I think how she projects that on screen as Josephine is very interesting, because she's presented as again back into the film about the idea of rich, and then she gets brought down to a pauper and back up again. And I just think her dynamic here is that I think she basically owns Joaquin Phoenix in this film. Again, through a dynamic that's very much abusive and awkward and very strange, but she deals with a lot of internal prowess here, sat there knowing that this is crumbling, that she's not worthy of the weight or the air that she breathes around him, has been like manipulated, like sent away. I'd say this. I know that's a cop out, but I'd say she's very, very good here. I can't wait to see this Fantastic Four thing that she's in. But
Woo!
we've lost another one to the machine, haven't we? But yeah, Napoleon. I know that's a cop out, but she's
Definitely
very
not a
good
cop
here.
out. She is great here. I think she is absolutely fantastic. I mean, to rival Joaquin Phoenix and that performance in this film, and she does rival him. I think that says a lot. I think she's great
Mm-hmm.
here. For me, I mean, Napoleon's definitely up there. I really love Pieces of a Woman as far
I
as her
knew you were gonna say. Yeah, I
performance.
knew it.
But that's not gonna be my pick because that is
Really?
great. But I love, me and Nicola Gross are the only two who liked Florian Zeller's The Sun. I love The Sun
Oh
for very
wow.
personal reasons. Everyone else gave it 1 star, but I give it 5 stars. This film, I think, is such a nuanced and brilliant take on a toxic family dynamic through divorce and how it affects the child and the real world consequences of ego, actually, and being a fragile male, and trying to figure out what to do and what is right and the consequences of that when you have ego infecting that. I think she is fantastic in that film. I think the film all around is like perfect. Not, again, one of those where I think it's really explicit what it's doing and is quite worthy that no one else enjoyed. But Pieces of a Woman is like fucking phenomenal.
I thought you
And
were
her
going to choose.
performance.
I thought you were going to choose Hobbs and Shaw, but never mind.
It was a close fourth. I will say. Of course, this is still Avengers Doomsday, which will be number 1, but we will get there when we get there. Jack, thank you so much for joining me for this fun bonus Apple TV Plus episode. Where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on X, and you can find me on Clapper with the reviews Alien Romulus dropping, and I'm going to do a review for The Exorcism, the Russell Crowe film. Yeah. And you can find me on Letterboxd, going through a myriad of very strange alternate cuts of films and strange stuff and random shit. But thank you very much for indulging me here, because I know that this is very impromptu for Carson's program. Carson's been very kind to present these on the ClapperCast, and that it's basically just me talking about why I love Ridley Scott so much. And Carson's like a cheerleader in the background. So thank you very much for having me on here. And it's just generally really, really welcoming to talk about a really interesting filmmaker who seems to get like shit on for no reason now, and that's not right. And I won't stand for it. But thank you for being in my corner and allowing me to be in here to talk about the emotional complexity of Ridley Scott movies and of Napoleon. So thank you very much, Carson.
No worries. I know you're rubbing off on me because the emotions I got when I was at work and I looked down on Twitter and I saw Napoleon Director's Cut surprise release on Apple TV Plus. It was like, I haven't felt that way since I heard a Cloverfield film was coming during the Super Bowl. Like, I was like, whoa, like, this is insane. Gotta get home and kind of watch my 4-hour Napoleon cut because that shit rocks. And it does. You can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll be back next week to discuss I Saw the TV Glow. And then actually just a quick thing I'll say, over the next few months, so we finished Summer of Blockbusters last week. Obviously next week we have a entirely different film we're talking about. I want to just quickly mention, because it's starting right after that, is that over the next couple months ahead of Halloween, we are going to be lightly, this is not like an official, well, we're going to call it an official series, but it's not connected like Summer of Blockbusters. We're going to be back on the road to Halloween. Long fans of ClapperCast know that was our original series. Every October and every September, we did our big Paul's Road to Halloween. Paul sadly won't be joining us for a lot this year. But we last year looked at the Universal Monster films. We looked at the classic Universal Monsters for our Halloween special. And this season, over the next couple months, both here on the main feed and on Patreon, we're going to be looking at the modern versions of these films. So we're looking at remakes of them. We're looking at some that are good, some that are bad. We will see what happens. Some are going to be delights. Some are going to be probably a little bit horrifying, to be honest. But I'm very excited for that. And Jack, I think you're joining us for most of those. So it's going to be a very, very fun adventure. So if you want to see that, as well as just other new releases and classic releases being reviewed, stay here and join us on ClapperCast. Again, thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.